Last week I took my dog to this fenced-in dog park. I try to go around 5 or 6 because that's when most people get off of work and bring their dogs, so there's a large amount of dogs for my puppy to socialize and play with. It rained earlier in the day but stopped, so I was surprised to see only one person in the dog park. I knew both him and his dog, and we chatted for a bit while our dogs chased each other around. Also worth mentioning, the atmosphere was just so creepy. A low, thick fog covered the entire dog park. It was that horrible weather that's somehow both humid and cold, just a dreary, rainy fall day. It wasn't that dark yet, so when the guy and his dog left, I decided to stay for a while and play fetch with my dog. Mistake number 1. I throw the ball around for a bit, and on one throw, something caught my eye. There was a man, in all black, hood up, standing at the fence, completely still, facing towards me. I couldn't see his face, so I don't know if he was looking at me. I tried to brush it off as maybe he's just watching us play fetch. I do have a 5-month-old puppy, after all, who is adorable and draws a lot of attention from strangers. I threw the ball in his direction a few more times so that I could glance at him to see if he would move on. He never did. At that point, I started to get pretty freaked out. I didn't want to stay alone in a dog park with only one entrance. It was significantly darker at this point as well. I really wanted to get out of there, but in order to leave, I'd have to walk past this man. The dog park only has one entrance on one side. You have to walk the length of the dog park on this path in order to get to where you park. Walking past him was the only way out. So I gathered my stuff and began to leave. I walked to the entrance, glancing at him every few seconds, and he's still standing completely still, but now he's turned more towards me. I took out my phone and pretended to be talking to someone, saying things like, "Okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes. 15? What? That's too soon." "Okay, Dad, I'll try." The moment I left the dog park, he turned and started walking away towards the parking lot. I was relieved, but only for a moment. He wasn't walking, he was shuffling, only a few feet at a time. Then he would stop completely, turn around and look at me, then keep going. Repeat 3 or 4 times. Then his walking changed. He started throwing his head back, looking up at the sky repeatedly and rhythmically and taking huge strides forward. His movements very bizarre, an exaggerated tiptoe-like walk. If you've ever read The Smiling Man on our Nosleep, it reminded me of that. Like, exactly like that. Except he was moving slow, not fast. The moment he started doing it, that story was the first thing that popped in my head, and still every 5 to 10 feet or so he would look back at me. I was walking behind him slowly in the same direction towards my car. Needless to say, I was pretty much 100% convinced I was going to be stabbed, robbed, kidnapped, or whatever. I was scared to death. My whole body was tense and cold. I've never felt that kind of fear in my entire life, like deep, horrible pit of your stomach, I could die tonight fear. Then suddenly he turns sharp and runs into the trees alongside the path. I took this opportunity to pick up my pace and pass the spot where he had ran into the trees. Mistake number 2. Barely seconds after I passed him, I hear a rustling, and he comes out of the trees, behind me, fast. No longer walking like the Smiling Man, a fast, curt power walk straight at me. This is where I freaked out and started sprinting. Side note, my puppy was clueless to everything and was having a great time. Oh boy, running. He's useless. I was only about 30 yards from my car. I scooped up my dog, not an easy feat to do while running, he's about 40 pounds, and jumped into the driver's seat, started my car, locked the doors, and peeled out of there as fast as I could. As I was backing up out of the parking space, the light shined for just a second on the man, who was standing at the end of the path at the beginning of the parking lot, completely still, just staring. I may or may not have called my mom and cried the entire way home. I was so shaken up, I didn't want to walk around at night for a few days. Even writing this has made me incredibly uncomfortable. I told people that I frequently see there about the encounter, and now I make sure that I am never the last person in the dog park. This happened when I was about roughly 9 to 10 years old. My brother Luke was around 2 years younger than me, so he would have had to have been about 7. We live in a pretty safe suburb in a small city in Australia. Most often, particularly in summer, us kids would be out after dark playing Spotlight and other night games with our neighborhood friends. We lived in a street where most people knew each other and would look out for the kids in the street. One particular time during summer after dinner, my brother and I went back outside to play. School holidays meant we didn't have to come back inside till about 8 p.m. Because none of our friends would come out to play, we decided to take out our dog for a walk to the park. This park was about a 10-minute walk from our house. To get to the park, you could either walk by the pathway, which went behind houses on neighboring streets. You then went through an underpass, which had a main road on top. Another way to go was via a main road that our street ran off. The main road went parallel to the pathway and hooked up to another main road which crossed over that pathway, creating that underpass. My brother and I decided to go the back way through the underpass, as we could race each other this way. Both my brother and I played sports, so even though we were young, we could run fast. About halfway to the park, I was slowing down because I thought I heard rustling in the bushes behind me. I didn't think much of it and continued on. We got to the park and hung around for a bit. When it started to get dark, we decided to head home. As we got closer to the underpass, my brother was lagging behind me. I noticed a big figure in the underpass with what looked like a big dog. We kept walking for a bit, and my heart started to beat a bit faster. My brother hadn't noticed at this point. When my dog started to get anxious, my brother looked up at this point and kind of looked at me. We kept going, but a lot slower this time. As we got within 15 meters of the underpass, I could tell this person was a male, quite tall and large. He was leaning against the wall of the underpass, facing us. I was already feeling really off, but my stomach pretty well fell into my butt at this point. We had to make the decision to either turn around, go through the underpass and pretty well come into straight contact with this guy, or go back via the main road. I said to my brother, "Luke, let's go to the main road." He agreed straight away, so we veered a slight right, which led us up the slight hill to the main road almost on top of the underpass. We crossed the road and started heading straight home. We both immediately felt a lot safer. We hadn't gone far when I started feeling funny again. I turned around and back in the distance, this guy was running towards us. I freaked out, called out to my brother to look behind him, and he just turned to me and said, "Let's run." We both bolted. I turned around a couple of times, and this guy was close enough to us that he could have caught up to us, but still far away enough that it would have looked weird to cars passing by. By this point, we had turned into our street, not looking behind us, still going as fast as we could. When we got to our house, we were both exhausted. My brother went straight inside. I turned around and noticed that the guy was about 100 meters behind and was slowing down to a stop. I quickly went inside. We never saw this person again, that I know of, but from then on, we were a lot more hesitant to go out late. I am quite a loner and like to go on walks just to get some me time. This one time on the 27th of November, I decided to go on another lengthy walk of mine. There was something eerie this time, though, as I had a feeling that the 27th of November is a night that something grotesque was going to happen, and boy, was I right. So, at around 2 a.m., I was restless and made my way into the cold night with that same feeling of dread I had had earlier in the day. The first hour of my walk was pretty normal and nothing out of the ordinary, but lo and behold, I had a feeling that I was being watched. Bearing in mind it was about 3 a.m. now, I was sitting on a bench that was in a park that wasn't very well lit. Someone else being in the park was very unlikely, as it's a small town and the only people who would be around at this time is drunk idiots who'd do my head in. Anyways, there was no sound coming from the dark figure that caught my eye. He was just standing there staring in my direction. I looked down at my phone to put my torchlight on and pointed my light towards the dark figure, but to my surprise, he had vanished. Me just being paranoid and extremely tired, I just ignored the weird encounter and decided it would be best to make my way home and get some shut-eye. Placing my phone back into my pocket and lighting up another cigarette, I made my way back to my house, but still had this uneasy feeling of someone watching me. I am normally not easily scared, but this felt different, like someone had decided to taunt me. I looked behind me to see the same dark-figured man standing right beside a tree, just looking my way. Now, although this isn't something my mind had made up, I shout to the figure, Hey man, is there a problem? You could tell there was fear in my voice, but I wasn't going to let this creep get the best of me. No response from him. This was just getting weird now. I stood there and my eyes widened. The man got to the floor and started crawling towards me in a manner I could only describe as insane. The only thing I could hear was this hissing noise, which I presumed was coming from him. I just stood there wondering what on earth he was going to do to me, but in my current state, I just looked at him with fear. As he edged closer, I vaguely noticed something was dangling from his rucksack. I guessed that it was some bird or some sort of small creature. Anyway, I didn't want to hang around to find out, so I dashed up a small lane right to my house. Looking back on the ordeal, maybe I shouldn't have headed straight back to my house, as he would have known where I lived, but my head was in a messed up place from all the fear this man had caused me. I ran through my gate to my front door and quickly glanced behind me to find him standing just outside my gate. One thing the man said to me will always send chills down my spine to this day. He muttered the words, "One day, we will meet again, and this time, you will be coming home with me." The events of this night stopped me from going on walks because I still, even to this day, 5 years on, fear that he will come back and take me to some sinister place where he can do whatever he wants to me. This took place when I was in my early 20s. I was walking back home coming from a friend's house. Normally it takes about 30 minutes to get home, but I had a few drinks and was zigzagging across the road. It was still dark out, but I could see the sun touching the horizon in the distance. After 15 minutes of walking, I ended up on a crossroad. I had the choice of going dead ahead, which led me straight to an apartment complex, or take a left and go through a medium-sized park, eventually leading me to my complex. My girlfriend gets angry when I come home drunk, so I thought a walk through the park would sober me up a bit. This decision changed my night drastically. I followed the trail alongside a small pond which led me to some stairs uphill. Here I paused for a bit and lit up a smoke. In the distance I could see a girl entering the park and jogging towards me. We greet each other and I continue climbing the stairs. After some time I reach the top and feel a bit nauseous. I take a deep breath, and then I heard it. A short scream followed by glass breaking in the distance. I look around to try to find out where this noise might have come from. I feel reluctant to go back down, but are haunted by this weird feeling in my gut, not the normal feeling alcohol gives you. After having a fierce discussion with myself, I make my way back down the stairs. Once down, I start following the trail, which leads me deeper into the park. It's still dark out, and my vision is limited to the dim streetlights across the pond. 5 minutes into my walk, I start having a discussion again. Did I imagine hearing a scream? Am I that wasted? I stop and light up another smoke. As soon as I use my lighter, a whisper breaks the silence. I couldn't make out what was said, but I could hear the direction it came from. I go off trail and wait for my eyes to get used to the dark. Another whisper breaks the silence, and this one I could make out. "Shh, little girl. Everything will be fine. Just keep your mouth shut." Chills run up and down my spine as I make my way to where the whispering came from. My eyes are used to the dark and I end up on a small clearing between the trees. Here I wait and listen. The silence made me feel nauseous again. I lean up against a tree about to puke when I see movement in the corner of my eye. I drop down on my knees and crawl as stealthily as possible to where I spotted movement. The world felt like it was spinning and I could hear the blood gushing in my ears. Then I spot him, on top of her, pantless and dirty to the bone, pressing both his hands on her face. No discussion this time. I get up and start running like a madman toward the horrible scene in front of me. The man looks up and lets out a scream. I ram my knee into his face and he drops like a bag of potatoes. I get on top of him and start swinging. Everything turned black and I feel his warm blood dripping down my fists. Then a sharp cold pinch in my lower back wakes me up from my blind rage. I turn around and am greeted by another man holding a broken bottle in his hand. No shirt and as dirty as the man laying in front of me. He jumps on top of me and I feel another cold pinch in my shoulder. I puke and the man hesitates for a second. Big mistake. I grab his head and start pushing his eyes inward. He lets out a horrifying scream and drops down next to me. My blind rage returns and I start swinging again, my mind racing with thoughts. I wake up in the arms of a man. I struggle, not knowing who he is or where I am. He tells me the cops are on their way and I should try to remain still. The last thing I notice is the sun shining through the trees above me before I black out again. I wake up in the hospital and am greeted by 2 officers. I explained to them what had happened, and they told me I was brave, but stupid. A part of glass was sticking out of my back when a jogger found me. It had missed my spine by a couple of inches. Luckily, the girl had managed to sustain no major injuries. I did, however, kill the man I found on top of the girl. The paramedics had tried to resuscitate him, but he was already too far gone. The guy that had stabbed me needed to go into surgery, seeing as one of his eyes was badly damaged. I made a full recovery and regularly talked to the girl jogger who is now one of my closest female friends. Thank God for me being an annoying drunk and not listening to the voice in my head. This happened to me 14 years ago when I was in 4th grade. Back then it was very common that every morning before school started, kids would be dropped off at the park. From there we would walk to the school before the bell rang at 8:30 a.m. Keep in mind the park is right next door to my old elementary school, so there really wasn't much of a distance or any danger for that matter. The one and only road that led to the park and school had lots of traffic and people walking around. So my mom drops me off, and since we were pretty early and my friends were already walking towards the swing set in the park, I told her I would go there and wait with them for the bell. Mom said it was fine, but to not get to class late or else I would be grounded. I quickly agreed, said goodbye to my mom, and headed straight to my friends. Now in this park, way in the back, there is, or was, I haven't been there in years, a wooded area that you can go in for maybe half a block, and then you run into a fence that separates a farm and the park. It was a very cool area to run and play in, and the swing set where my friends were hanging out was maybe 30 feet away from the trees. As I was getting closer to my friends, I saw something shift next to a tree, and I stopped to get a better look at whatever it was. And that's when I saw him. A tall man with greasy brown hair and dark clothes. He was way in the back of the park in the tree line, just looking around, not doing anything that would cause alarm. So I dismissed him as just a man walking around, or one of the farm helpers that we would usually see from time to time feeding the chickens or fixing the fence. I went on to talk to my friends, but I kept getting a bad feeling. Fortunately, my parents were very good at teaching me to listen to my instincts and be aware of my surroundings whenever I am near strangers. Feeling a bit weird about the man, I told my friends that we should start heading out to the entrance of the school, but because it was 7:45, they didn't want to get stuck in the cafeteria waiting to be allowed into the playground. I started to get upset because the bad feeling I had was getting worse. I felt kind of trapped, and it was clear to my friends that something was up with me, but they dismissed it as me being in one of my bad day moods and continued to goof off and be loud. I looked around, still feeling nervous, and looked towards the woods. He was still there, except this time he was looking at us. He had a cold look in his face, and I could tell he was angry. That's when he saw me staring, and I quickly looked away, trying to play it off. Unfortunately, that gained his attention and slowly made his way to us. When he got close, he smiled at us, and in a very friendly voice started to ask general questions about what we liked, what kind of video games we liked to play, what school we went to, and stuff like that. I stayed quiet and just listened to my friends answer his questions without hesitation. The man then turns to me, the only girl in the group, and with a creepy smile tells me that I have beautiful black hair and a pretty face. I quietly and nervously thanked him without looking at him and moved closer to my best friend Josh. He was a 6th grader and the eldest of the bunch. When Josh saw how nervous I was because of the man, he held my hand and moved me behind him. The man looked annoyed that Josh did that and moved around him to be closer to me. At this point, I looked over to our other friends, and they finally realized that something was very wrong, but they were just as afraid as I was to do or say anything. The man kept saying that I was so beautiful, and that I looked like a pretty doll, and just kept saying all these compliments that a stranger should never tell a little kid without the parents present, and even that's iffy. At this point, my instincts were telling me to run or to cry out for help, but I was petrified and couldn't move at all. The man then started to touch my hair while complimenting me and said how he would like to take me home, how I could be his special little doll. He would buy me toys and lots of pretty things. He then grabbed me by the arm and pulled me close to him. Thankfully, when he did that, it snapped Josh out of his fear of what was going on, and he pulled me back towards him fast, and we all took off running. He was so fast that I guess the man didn't expect it. The man cursed and yelled and started running after us. I swear it felt like we ran forever to the entrance, and I felt somewhat relieved when we were that much closer to the school and to safety, but the man was still behind us. I was sure that he was going to catch up and hurt us for running away, but when I looked back, he had stopped near a bench with a hate-filled look on his face. We finally made it out of the park and just ran straight to the entrance of the school where one of our teachers, Mrs. D, was barely making her way out to help with the street crossing. When we saw her, we ran to her and I just collapsed on the floor sobbing while the boys told Mrs. D what happened and what the man looked like. Miss D immediately informed the office. The entire school went on lockdown and the cops were called. I stayed glued to Josh while we spoke to the cops and waited for our parents to arrive, and thankfully the teachers were very understanding of why I needed to be close to my best friend and left us alone. My mom and dad were so scared and furious that this man had tried to take me away, and were thankful that Josh reacted quickly and led us to safety. After that incident, the school took steps to make sure all kids were dropped in front of the school safely. The school district sent out letters to parents telling them to not allow us to be in the park unsupervised, and a patrol car was assigned to our school. Although the cops searched for the man, he was never found, which terrifies me, and to this day, I can still remember the look in his eyes as he saw us get away. I don't know what would have happened to me had Josh not been there to protect me, and I am so thankful I had and still have such an amazing friend looking out for me. Yesterday on Thanksgiving, I woke up from having slept late and wanted to go for a walk in the park before the sun went down. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a van next to me. There was a woman outside the passenger door of the van. She whirled around and stared at me for about 6 seconds. Her face was completely cracked out. It had that sunken reptile look. Her eyes were absolutely dead. I could tell she was completely out of it. In the driver's seat was a greasy-looking man. He was just staring at me. I got out of the car and wasn't too worried yet because this park is kind of on a busy street, and began walking towards the path that would lead me into the park while constantly looking behind me. The crackheads were now in their van, rooting around for something. As I made my way into the park, the sun began fading fast. I was also upset because I was really looking forward to walking in the park for stress relief, but the darker it got, I kept worrying that the couple were following me or waiting around the next bend for me. Finally, I gave up any chance of enjoying the stroll and decided to return to my car. This is where it gets doubly odd. As I exited the trees and made my way back to my car, I saw the van. At this point, I was about 2 minutes from my car. The woman was outside the passenger door again, only this time the man was standing next to her. She began making sharp, high-pitched mewing noises, and then moaning. And then a blue light appeared before my feet and kind of danced back and forth in front of my feet. The guy was holding a flashlight and shining it through the van's windows directly in front of me. Every internal alarm I had was going off. Both the man and the woman were watching me with dead eyes, the woman still mewing. I was too afraid to run back into the trees and risk an incident where no one would be around to help me. I decided to just risk the chance, and I might be faster than them, that I could get into my car quicker than they could do whatever it was they were going to do to me. I began walking at a very fast clip toward my car while keeping an eye on them. As I got 5 feet away from my driver's door, the man made a beeline for me, his blue light hitting me in the eyes. He was right at my trunk, headed for my driver's door when I shut it and locked the doors immediately. The woman walked to my passenger door and just stared in at me. The guy did the same at my driver door. I flicked the man off and gave him a death stare. I started my car and sped off away from the park and returned home. Then I called my family, who were all in a different state than me, and told them I loved them and missed them. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was walking around with my friend. Me and James were just walking around because we had almost nothing to do. James proposed we went to these houses that were being built close to our local park. It was about a 10-minute walk to the park and another 2 or so to get to the construction houses. We walked through the park and through the trees to a big open area of dirt where the houses were being built. The park was surrounded by wooded areas. We pretty much just explored the houses and were pretty much just admiring how they looked and pretended to talk as if though we were the ones that owned the house. After about an hour of messing around in houses, trash containers, and on the cat machines that they had left there, it started to become dark because we had lost track of time. I told James we should head back because it takes a little bit to actually get back to his house. After the short 3-minute walk to the park, I noticed some guy who was just sitting down looking at us. James thought it was one of his friends, so he started walking over, and after realizing that it wasn't him, he just met back up with me and we kept walking towards the house. After only a few minutes of walking, James turned around and noticed the same guy we saw at the park was walking on the same dirt path at us. He was a good 100 to 200 feet back, so we didn't think much of it, even though we kept joking about him following us so he could kill us. After we got off the dirt path, we took a right and the man behind us also took the turn. Getting a little superstitious because it was almost pitch black out, we sped up a little. I noticed early on when he took the right turn to follow us off of the path, he was no longer 100 feet away, he was more like 50. I told James, and to test it, we took a longer way to the house and had a lot more turns. Every turn we took, the guy also took. We finally had arrived at the house, and as soon as we got inside, we looked out the window and didn't see him. We thought it was a coincidence, and we just stayed inside and played some video games. After a while, I got bored and told him I was going to watch Netflix in the living room. James continued to play games while I was in the living room, and I noticed about halfway through my movie that there was a kind of blurry shadow sitting right next to the back door. Right next to the living room behind the couch is where the door was. I thought it was Bandit, James's dog, so I paused my movie to go and let him in, but when I got close, I saw it was actually a person. At first, I was thinking it had to be James because he's tall, but as I kept walking closer, I noticed it was some random dude I had never saw staring me dead in the eyes. I instantly freaked out because James had the house alone for the week. The second I started to run, he tried opening the back door. I ran to James and told him, and then we went upstairs and called the police. I acted tough, but I was scared out of my mind and honestly freaking out. We heard him banging on the glass a few more times, and then the banging stopped. Shortly after that, we heard the sirens, and I had never felt more at ease. The police officers searched the area, but they came up empty-handed and just told us that he was gone. Even though the officer told us that we were safe, we still called my mom and had her pick us up. That was the last night I went over to stay the night at James's house, and I always feel bad that he had to spend the entire week there, alone. This happened roughly 6 years ago in 2010. I would have been about 26 years old at the time. I live in a town in the mountains of southern Appalachia. If you aren't from this region, and that immediately brings to mind the visions of poverty and dark hollers, well, they do exist, but the town I am from, and still reside in, is a university town with roughly 70,000 people. We have a number of public parks, but in recent years the most popular one is one of the newest, which was built on the south side of town and has a dog park, in addition to a normal playground-type park for children and numerous walking trails, some of which go through wooded areas. The path is lit at night through most of the park, and although the gates close at sundown, it isn't uncommon for people to be walking their dogs late at night. I need to describe the layout of the park a little in order for the story to make sense. There's a large parking lot on one end. This is the main entrance of the park, and it's where the children's playground and the dog park are located, as well as the restrooms. This lot is long rather than wide and stretches along the sidewalk that runs next to the playground. On the other end of the park, which is to say over some hills and through some lightly forested areas, there is a small pond and another smaller lot. This lot has a gate just like the bigger one, but it has a little area before the gate where it's common for people walking at night to park their cars. I had a friend back in those days who was an avid walker. She was a couple of years older than I was, and although petite, was sort of fearless. She would often go walking at night by herself, and her apartment at the time was sort of out in the country, but only a mile or so from this park. So sometimes she would drive out there and walk by herself at night as well. I would say things sometimes like, "Oh, you should be more careful," because I am a man who was raised in the South and we are perpetually worried about the females in our lives. She was fairly enlightened and would get angry when I would say things like this. None of this is to say I told you so, I'm just trying to paint a picture. Anyway, long story short, I started meeting her some evenings and walking with her, figuring a bearded 6'1", 250-pound man would be a deterrent to most creepers. So one night we were walking, and while there were usually a few other people in the park, it wasn't super late. It was just late fall and nights were starting to come a little quicker. It seems like maybe it's around 8 p.m., but like I said, it's been 6 years. Anyway, I had a rental car that week because of some work being done on my car and had it parked behind the gate on the wooded side of the park. As we came through the woods and rounded a hill towards the main entrance of the park, I sort of clocked a van in my peripheral vision that was pulling in the gate of the park, which for whatever reason had not yet been closed. The Parks and Rec employees in my town are sort of notorious for not being strict enforcers of closed at sundown rule anyway. The weird thing about this was that it was sort of a cliché creeper van. It was an older model Chevy with no windows in the back, a sort of molded rust paint job, and dark-tinted windows in the front. For a lot of you, depending on where you live, this might already be raising alarms, but in Tennessee, that is like every fifth car on the road. As we walked up the sidewalk parallel to the lot, the van turned behind us and then drove slowly past us on our left, coming almost to a stop, then speeding up to circle around ahead of us at the other end of the lot. At this point, obviously, I was paying closer attention. Now the van came back towards us and the driver's side window was down. This would be the part where a lot of naysayers will probably think I'm making this up, because the man staring at us from that van was about the closest thing to a cliché creep I could think of. He was large, bigger than me, with weird aviator-style glasses that may have been sunglasses, but were transparent enough that you could still see his eyes. He was wearing a hat and a camo-style coat, and had a black mustache. He idled not 10 feet from us, just staring at us expressionless for a moment. We both sort of stopped, stiffened, and looked back at him. There was something about his gaze, some cold-hearted malevolence the likes of which I have never really felt in my life, which immediately chilled me to the bone. I've read articles about sociopaths and psychopaths where scientists theorize the reason we feel uneasy in their presence is tied into an ancient biological response from the times when truly we were their prey and they were alpha predators among human groups and tribes. I felt that in that moment, I felt like I was out in the wild, naked on the tundra, and he was zeroing in on me. It was this feeling more than anything that elevated this moment for me from merely dealing with a creep to something that was perhaps far more sinister. I grabbed my friend by the arm and said roughly, "Let's go," and started quickly across the field towards the series of hills and trees that were between us and the car, leaving the sidewalk behind. She was sort of shocked at first and followed quickly. We half walked, half ran a few hundred yards before realizing that the van had pulled out of the lot behind us and disappeared. My adrenaline was still pumping, and we had a quick conversation, basically consisting of, "What in God's name was that?" and "Let's get to the car and get out of here." We quickly moved through the woods and started back down the hill. As it descends towards the lot, there were a couple of wide, sweeping switchbacks with some trees and shrubs alongside. We crested the hill and could see the lot below, and what we saw there made my blood stop pumping for a moment. Behind my rental car, the Chevy van was parked, and with his bright lights shining on the car and up the hill a little ways. We hid behind some foliage and watched as he switched his headlights on and off for a minute or two. Then he pulled back a bit and shined his brights further up the hill. He sat there for a long moment as we cursed the fact that we had left our phones in the car and tried to decide what to do. Of course, then he abruptly peeled out of the lot and took off down the road, which I didn't mention before is a 2-lane country road with not much on it but cow fields and trees. We took off running down the hill towards the car, and we were just outside the ring of trees near the lot when he suddenly swung back in. Luckily, we were near cover and got behind a tree just up the hill from him. Again, he started shining his brights off and on into the trees. At this point, I was thinking I was going to have to attack him or something to try and draw him away long enough for my friend to escape. Fear, adrenaline, and anger all converged in me like a dark river, and I was probably seconds away from bursting out from the tree and taking a run at him when he once again peeled out of the lot as fast as he could. Well, he didn't have to tell us twice. We sprinted the remaining distance to the rental car and jumped in. I took off and went about 60 miles per hour down the road until we got into a neighborhood. I never saw the van on the road, In fact, I didn't see any cars until we got to a main road. I have no idea where he went, if he was sitting somewhere off the road waiting or what. We got back to our apartment and my friend told me that, at long last, she would accept a can of mace if I wanted to give her one. We had a good laugh at that, but were desperately shaken. We decompressed and talked it over for a while, and I agreed to contact the police the next day. I went down to the station and told an officer what happened, and I never heard anything else about it. I have no idea what he wanted. We joked that we were 5 minutes away from being turned into lamps, but I really have no idea. Maybe he was just a pervert. Maybe he was a good old boy that just didn't like the idea of people in the park after dark. But that look he gave me when he was idling next to us makes me think we were pretty lucky to get away. Whatever his intentions were, I would surely be glad to never meet him again. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoy these videos and wish to support the channel further, be sure to check out my Patreon, where for $1 or more a month you'll have early access to all future narrations before they hit YouTube. And if you'd like to get your hands on some Let's Read merch just in time for the Halloween season, head over to shop.spreadshirt.com/letsread. All links in the description. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.